Okay guys, welcome back. This is lecture number 4. For those of you who are paying attention, I'm skipping 3. Lecture number 3 is an introduction to Unix. If you're not taking the Unix course that I'm currently teaching right now, then I would recommend going over lecture number 3. If you are simultaneously enrolled in that course, or if you've taken a Unix course before, you can skip lecture 3. I put it in there because the internet is Unix based, and for certain tasks in web development and even using HTML and CSS, you're going to need to be able to communicate with a Linux server or Unix server, and so it entails FTPing files back and forth, knowing about URLs, knowing about website location, web space, and stuff like that. And it's really a whole course in itself. But I put together a little lecture 3. It's about 20 or 30 slides of a Unix overview, and I normally don't cover it, but I put it in there just because right now is when you start thinking about Unix, because you start thinking about, well, I'm going to make sure I'm going to create a website soon, so I'm going to need to upload it. But what we're going to do today is start creating web pages, and I'm going to demo them on my computer, actually in a Windows box, so we don't actually have to have anything, we don't have to upload anything to or FTP anything to a Unix site. But eventually what I'll do is I'll show you the bhacker.com site, and I'll show you how to FTP files and how the files are organized and the directory structures and stuff like that. But I'll save that for after we get past the basics, because what we're trying to do is work on assignment number 1 or get there. So today I'm going to go over the beginning part of putting together HTML web pages. Next week is going to be the first lecture on CSS, and it will be an overview of it, and then the following week will be CSS implementation. I'll be showing you some CSS stuff. But there's a lot of different things in terms of the basic HTML that I've kind of covered already. I'm not going to go over tag by tag, but instead I'm going to go over example by example, and we'll kind of see how it works, especially, obviously this is designed for brand new people who have never programmed in HTML before, so we'll take it from Notepad through the browser, and we'll show you how to view the source of the document, stuff like that as well. Alright, so looking at the basic HTML, HyperText, tags, elements, going over some fundamentals just to get us back in thinking about what we're looking at here. HyperText and HTML. HyperText markup language is what the HTML stands for, as we've seen already. It's basically for static content. As I mentioned last week, I talked about dynamic and static pages. This is our little review before we start moving on. HyperText refers to the fact that the web pages are more than just text, that they contain multimedia, links, provide you from jumping from one page to another page, and give you more flexibility in terms of just static pages themselves. And the concept of markup, which we actually covered already in terms of what those tags are doing and what HTML is accomplishing. So it refers to the fact that it works by augmenting the text with special tags, so that's the markup part of it, in terms of what it is we're trying to accomplish. So let me set the record straight in terms of the requirements, because I'm going to enforce this strictly. When you turn assignments in, they must be written in Notepad, and I'm going to show we're going to write some Notepad assignments or web pages today. And you can't use a what you see, what you get kind of text editor or web development tool. Most students will attempt, I would say about 50% of you will attempt to write it in Microsoft Front Page or a web development tool. And it's just students who aren't sitting here right now. It's the students who are thinking, oh yeah, I can do that. Adobe does that, or Microsoft Word actually, you can save it as HTML. So you put it all in there and you save as HTML, and it creates a website for you. Those are really easy to find. Those are really easy to spot, because you just open up the file in a text editor, and you see on the header on the top all this stuff for Microsoft, and all this stuff for Adobe, and all this stuff for all of the different text editor tools. So this is probably the last time I'm going to remember to say it, but just be warned. Must use Notepad. It comes free with Microsoft Windows, so there's no software you have to buy for this course. Notepad will do everything you ever wanted it to do. You can't use Microsoft Word, and if you're on a Mac, you can't use the text editor. The text editor, believe it or not, is not a text editor. You would think. In fact, I see a MacBook right there. Text edit's going to give you problems. For some strange reason, it's formatted text. So you want to look for something that's going to be just plain old ASCII text. And actually, you know what? I'll look for one. I'll tell you next week which text editor you can use on a Mac. But today I'm gonna go to a Windows partition on this computer, and we're gonna use Notepad. So that's not really a problem for today. So assembly language is a high-level analogy. Essentially, what we're looking at is the differences between writing things manually, which would be the assembly language kind of process, or using a what you see, what you get web development tool, which is going to be a higher level drag and drop. Which is not what we're doing. So, it's a little note on the bottom. So why are we learning low-level HTML using a basic text editor? Just to reiterate the point, we have a lot more control over what we're doing, and we'll see that. Because most people, the first thing that comes to mind is like, well, I want to be able to make a nice little menu on the side, and I want this scrolling text on the bottom. The thing is, it's actually easier to program it in Notepad than it is to actually use one of those text editor, one of those GUI tools. So we have more control. We can actually do some of this stuff easily. And you'll see there's hardly very many lines of code that we're actually writing. When you download and you look at files that are created from these what you see, what you get editors, they're huge. And they're just containing so much stuff. And they actually take longer to load. So a lot of people write things by hand because it loads faster. The smaller the file, the quicker it's going to load. The more efficient it's going to load it. The fewer problems you're going to have with compatibility. You know, the browser doesn't support some plugin that's being used, but the plugin's being used because it was supported by the what you see, what you get tool, so, or something of that nature. So, and you may also want to steal page components and integrate them into your existing pages. It's nice to know what those components look like if you want to steal them. Not promoting stealing. However, most good web developers learn from other web developers. And we'll see today it's pretty easy to see what other web developers have done. Actually, what I have to do is view the source, and I'll show you that. And we can see what they've done, and then you can say, oh, that's the tag they're using for that nice looking italics thing that they've got going on there. And then you can cut and paste it and use it yourself. And you may also want dynamic features such as scripts or applets that you can move and use inside of your HTML code that you can't do in some of these other editors as well. So you just have a lot more flexibility. It's a lot more efficient. And it's just easier, actually. Although it doesn't sound like it, it actually is. So let's get into HTML. So today's our hands-on approach. So just to review, just so we know what we're talking about, the tags versus the elements. What I'm going to go through is basic HTML. And then next week we'll see more higher level HTML than different, because there's so many different tags, so many different techniques in terms of what it is we're doing. So the HTML specifies a set of tags, and this is review for you. The tags have the opening and the closing brackets. This should also be review. We've covered this part already. And here's an example that specifies an image. So we have image, source is equal to, and we have some quotes here because we're following XHTML standards. We have this backslash because it's an empty. There's no opening and closing. It's referred to as an empty because there is no element. It's just a tag. We have this backslash. So this is XHTML compatible. This backslash is basically telling us that's the end of the tag. Most tags often have pairs, as we saw before already. So we have the title, the end of the title, and whatever's in between is what's going to be is essentially the element component, and these are referred to as the tag components. And so this is our standard opening and closing tag for the title, and this was going to put something on the screen. And don't worry, we're going to look at examples. In fact, I've got about 20 examples we're going to go through, and we're going to see it. So if you brought a computer, I can show you how to actually create these examples. I'm not going to provide them for you. They're in the lecture set. So you'll have to go through and cut and paste and create them on your own, which kind of can test out your tools as well. So what else got here? An HTML element is also an object enclosed in a pair of tags. So we have title my home page, which is a title element. And then we had this text appears in bold, which was an opening and a closing bold tag. And then we have the part of the text that is bold, is in terms of the paragraph here, part of the text that is bold, and we have bold right here. So we can see we can integrate different tags, we can embed tags inside of tags. We can put different tags in different sentences. The whole sentence doesn't have to be bold. Just this particular word, bold, is bold. So we can nest the tags, and we're going to see that today in terms of our introduction to it. And this P stands for paragraph, and I'll go through a lot of that stuff today as well. We don't actually have to put a closing paragraph for HTML, but as we saw last week, that's XHTML. So what we're going to be looking at today is completely XHTML compatible. And so the document itself is a collection of the elements, the text, the media with its content, with everything that's enclosed in terms of it. So let's get started. This is our page number 1, our Hello World HTML page. And we're going to look at essentially and go through some examples in terms of putting different components in the different sections. So the structural elements is what I would call a subcategory, or the first starting point in terms of the HTML tags. So it has two main structural elements, the head and the body, as I mentioned before. And what I'm going to do is kind of show you this live instead of the slet. What you can do, though, however, is cut, you can download the PPTs, the PowerPoints. Take inside the box, cut everything inside the box, and paste it in a notepad document. Oops, here we go. So I have a, whoops, hello. Got Windows, but I think it's asleep. Hello, let's try that again. If not, I'll just do it the old-fashioned way. Alright, that was page number 5. Let's find Windows. Here it is. It's asleep. That's what the problem is. There we go. We'll go back. So, this is a Windows desktop if you haven't seen it already. It's a Windows system inside of a Mac system. I'm using it because most of you guys are Windows people. The concept is identically the same, although you will have to find a text editor for the Mac. Don't use TextEdit. So these are actually notepad files if I open it up. I can open it up in WordPad or Notepad. I actually like Notepad better than WordPad because WordPad will format the text for you, and it's pretty much compatible, but there are some differences. You'll see some hard returns and stuff in the text. So if you right mouse click on it and you open it up, you can open it up in Notepad. And I purposely made the font kind of big, which is working out quite well for me, which is good. So what we can do here is essentially, here's my PowerPoint. Make this a little bigger. What we can do is essentially cut and paste this, stick it in a notepad file, and put on the extension. You got two choices. You can call it an HTML or an HTML, and it's strictly a Windows convention. So if you haven't noticed, these icons, they kind of look like a Firefox. Because that's the web browser that's associated with this particular file type. For my system, you might have a different icon. It might look like Internet Explorer. If you save it with a TXT extension, it's going to look like a notepad file. So most common mistake when people start doing this, especially business students who don't have a computer science background, who start cutting and pasting and creating, and they have the wrong file extension. And so they double click on the file and nothing happens because it's a text file. Well, it is a text file, but this extension is associated with this particular extension, the .html, is associated with Firefox. So if I double clicked on this file, it should open it up in Firefox for me. And the page should run even though it's not on the internet. It's on my desktop. And here's the page here. And the page here, just put some text, the text that appears in the page, right? And on the title, it says title of page up here. This is hello world.html. It's like the easiest web page you'll ever create. And this is how you can essentially see what kind of code is being used. If I go, and it's pretty standard among all browsers, you have either under the view you have page source, or sometimes it says source. If I select the page source, I actually see the page source. And this is my example number 1. Actually, I like this better because now it's showing my comments in green, and it's showing my purple, or my body elements. So Firefox will actually color code the HTML text for you, just like a programming language compiler does. Internet Explorer is not going to do that. But for what we're doing right now, you're going to use one or the other, or you can use Chrome if you want. They all have the same features. Every one of them you could view the source. Every one of them you can actually edit it if you wanted to. If it's saved on your local disk. If it's on an internet website, usually you're not going to be able to save any changes that you make. But I would not use this as an editing tool. I would actually close the browser, go back to Notepad, bring up the document, and edit it from there. But this is good because it's color-coded. We can take a look at some of the components here. This is a very classic, I wouldn't call it a best practice, but I'd call it a standard. Very classic way of documenting your HTML code. We've got some comments up here. This is non-executable code. It's just identifying. This is a demo web page, and it's page number 01. You can actually label this, and you can save this anything you want. It doesn't have to be saved to page 01. We have our head section, and our head section is doing nothing more than setting a title. So title for the page. This is where the title for the page is showing up, actually. So it says title. So if I changed, actually, let me go back here. Oops. So if I change this and says, this is the ITU class today. Whatever instructions I'm going to have for the browser, as I mentioned last week when I went over the different body parts, that's going to be affected in terms of the head section. So we're talking to the browser. If we were using a scripting language, if we were using a CSS, we would be telling the browser, load the CSS, or use JavaScript, load JavaScript support, or you load Python or something, or do something in terms of the head. In the body, this is the text that appears on the page, so I'm just going to change this and just say, hello world. Hello world. And then when I save it, to run it, I just double click on it again, and lo and behold, I got hello world, and I have ITU class today on the top. We're going to see as we start integrating things like JavaScript into this, we can get hello world just by calling a function to go scroll across if we want. Or we could actually put it, let's say for example, on the bottom of the window instead of on the top of the window, but we used a title tag, so we set the title. And then the text that we put in here was just the text, and it kind of demonstrates the fact that you don't actually have to add any formatting to it. There's a lot of error pages, there's a lot of times in which you just want to put some text out there, like bad page, go back, or something. You don't have to actually format it, all you have to do is essentially put something in there, just type it in there. You're not going to get any scrolling, you're not going to get any word wrap, you're not going to get anything. You're just going to get flat text that appears in there. So let's, I know this is the slow way of doing it, but I couldn't figure out how to flip back and forth. So we're going through our elements, and hopefully at this point you can kind of see how the comments come into handy. That's the common comment. In fact, this you just kind of memorize in terms of looking at examples. You put the comments in between the arrows, and it allows you to quickly kind of see it. And the comments usually belong at the top of the page to identify the page. And then you can also put the comments throughout any one of the sections, actually. It doesn't matter where you put the comments. And then we have the head and we have the body section. So let's talk about our text layout for a few minutes. So the body that contains the multiple lines of text. And actually the body is going to contain everything. In fact, I want you to use head, I want you to use body. For every one of the assignments, you have to follow this convention. Because, as we've seen already, you can not use it. But even if you're not going to use it, you just put head, open, opening, close, if you're not going to put anything in the head. But you're going to be using CSS and stuff, so you're going to be using something in the head. But in terms of the body, the text layout and spaces are pretty much ignored in the browser. So every sequence of white space is interpreted as a single space. And this is where the hello world program becomes a little bit complicated, because people get fancy, and they let's see if this will flip back correctly. Yeah, there we go. That's what I wanted. I don't know why it wasn't doing it originally. So this particular example is number 2, and I'm moving them over here so I can know which one I stopped on. If we look at this source code, what we end up with is well, it was on the slide there a few minutes ago. Everything is the same pretty much at this point, except for down here. This is where new people who don't know anything about HTML end up with problems because they go, oh, you know, this is beautiful text, right? If I look at the text in a web browser, it all appears on one line. And it's actually pretty much a common scenario that occurs. Even though we put it on multiple lines, it's going to show up on one line. Each one of our 20 spaces turns into one space. And it's the browser that's doing the interpretation. So you'll always get one space. So when people try to put tabs in, people try to put set margins using the spaces, doesn't work. Even if you put them inside of tabs, doesn't work. White space always turns into one space. So if you remember that, then you don't make the mistake of trying to align things with spaces. Even if you're using the tags. Bad idea, actually. So let's see. We moved over. And stop me if anyone wants to see anything in particular. I know these examples will start getting a little bit more complicated soon, but at this point it's probably fairly straightforward. So every sequence turns into a space. The browser automatically wraps it. You can lay out the text in an HTML document for readability. It doesn't affect how it's going to be viewed. So a lot of times you'll see the text laid out for readability. In fact, especially if you're going to mix in things. You're going to mix in like elements from a different source or JavaScript stuff. You'll see it all on different lines. But it's for purposes of readability and practice instead of display. Overriding default layouts. Let's take a look at this for a second. So for the most part, the layout of the text must be left to the browser, hopefully. Why? Because the browser is the one who's interpreting. It's reading in the text file, applying the formatting tricks to it, and displaying it for you. But you can override some of the text layout. So you can cause a line break using a BR as a line break with no closing tag. And you can specify the new paragraph using the P's, the opening closing P brackets. And you can force a space. So as remember, I said before, only one space. And this is even experienced people end up with, you put 2 spaces, 3 spaces, and always go down to 1 space. You can actually use a character to insert a space. And you'll get any number of spaces instead of just one. So the non-breaking space starts out with an ampersand, and you'll see a lot of symbols start out this way. And this is a non-breaking space. This is what the NBSP stands for, which a lot of people, kind of go, well, what does that stand for? It's a non-breaking space, which means it's not going to break. Let's go space, 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 because otherwise the normal space is what they call a breaking space. It provides one white space, and then it stops, breaks, which is where that word came from. Which is kind of weird to think about. It doesn't sound like English to me, but so let's look at example number 3. And example number 3 has our more sophisticated tags. And what do we have here? I'm actually going back here. I'm going to view the source, page source. And now we have the title. We've gotten that far already. So now we're moving ahead. We have our new paragraph. We have our closing paragraph. And inside the paragraph, this is a paragraph of text. We put in a BR for line break. And an interesting thing about this is now we have the BR, which is the tag, the closing elements in red, which is really cool. This is just a Firefox coded thing. Do not color code your text. It will cause problems. But if you're looking at it in the web browser, then you're going to see the symbols. Like, for example, the non-breaking space is actually in here in red. And you see there's actually a semicolon that appears at the end of the non-breaking space. And this is something that, believe it or not, even experienced programmers leave out. Why? Because you're actually calling a command. You're saying insert a non-breaking space, semicolon. And so it's not a piece of text. When you put this semicolon back there, it reads as a command. So most of your Java commands, most of everything that you're going to put in terms of a scripting, you're going to start using semicolons for a lot of that stuff. So here we have a new paragraph. The paragraph here says this is another paragraph with a space, a gap space between some of the words. And we can see here this is another paragraph with, now we've put an extra space in. So we have 2 spaces instead of 1 space. If we put just 2 spaces in there, in fact we'll do that. I don't want to view that source though. Let's go back to the source. Oops. That's not what I wanted. If we take this, you say, well, I don't like that. It's really hard looking. I don't want that. Pull that out. And we've got 1, 2 spaces. 1, 2 spaces. And say, we could just do it with 2 spaces. And here's some words down here. Let's do that. We save it. Because you know you don't want to use that symbol. There's no more gap anymore. So I'm saying is at one point you're going to decide you're going to have to start learning the symbols. And the symbols, when I call them symbols, is really wrong. They're commands, they're statements. Because it's not really, I mean, it's a symbol, it's an ASCII symbol character. But it can't be done without it, is what I'm saying. So what ends up happening, and we'll start doing this next week, is we'll start learning some of these things that we have to do a certain way in order to get the desired effect. Here we might have something centered, or it may not be centered. Let's see what we're using here. We can go back to here. Oh, we're just putting in more spaces here. This paragraph is indented, the first line. So, and then we have our closing paragraph at the end. So we have in our body now we have 3 paragraphs, and we've excelled a little bit. We've integrated some special characters for the non-breaking space, and we've applied some formatting that was not the default browser. So, hello. There we go. Alright, so that was overriding the default layouts themselves. Now we can separate blocks of text if we wanted to. So what we're looking at in terms of the text layout is standard formatting. We haven't really applied anything to in terms of fonts, in terms of blocks, in terms of different formatting. And this kind of goes back to the concept of Microsoft Word. We have different levels of headers, and we can actually format the document with header 1, header 2, header 3. And the headers are actually built-in HTML tags that allow us to separate out. And they were in here originally to give us structure in the body of the document. Hardly anyone uses them. In fact, they'll go around this, and they'll make their own header. And they'll change the font, change the size, put it in italics, put 2 spaces underneath. All this work when they can just use the header. And we see when we start looking at CSS, we can change the definition of the header. So we have H1, H2, all the way up to H6. That's what we have. So we can specify the headers in terms of paragraphs or blocks of text. The H1 produces large, and then we have slightly smaller, slightly smaller, slightly smaller, down to really tiny 6. Which is kind of counterintuitive. If I were to rewrite this, I actually would make H6 the biggest and H1 the smallest. Because, thinking about 6 to 1, it's actually the opposite in terms of what it is. And what these predefined tabs are at this point, I wouldn't worry about it. Because when we start looking at CSS, we're going to redefine them. Because there are certain fonts, there's certain sizes. Some of them are italic, some of them are bold. There are different definitions that we've got in terms of the tags. So you can insert a horizontal rule as well to divide the sections, and as we saw already, the HR is our horizontal rule. And we can set the width in terms of a property for the horizontal rule of 50%, which sets the line, what do you call it, the width of the line, how thick the line is. There we go. And we can also set the size in terms of thickness. Excuse me, the width is this way. The size is the thickness of the line. Let me just flip. So this is on number 4. Hello. It would help if I didn't eat next to my computer so I didn't leave grease on my number pad. Oh well. Let's just go back this way. Alright, so number 4. Number 4 produces, and we'll take a look at what we've got here. Major header 1, major header 2. And here's some text, here's a subheading, here's some other text, here's a line that we've got. And then we've got some major header 2 down here, so there's some more text. So let's take a look at the code for that. And I want to bring it up in Notepad because I want to change it actually to kind of see the effect of it. And so this top is the header is going to be the same. The body itself, here's our major header. We're using an H1 tag that's going to say, and you can probably find online the definitions for each one of the font sizes in terms of the predefined tab. A lot of the definitions are also defined by the web browser. So the web browser's H1 in Firefox is going to look different than the Internet Explorer's H1 definition, which is why people don't like to use the default of anything. Because what the default looks like in one browser might be totally different than another. So we have our major header, we have our subheader, which we're using an H2 on there. We're going back to an H1 over here. And we're not really setting, our horizontal rule is here, but we're not really setting anything at this point. So we're just putting a line across. If we put in a horizontal rule opening and closing bracket, and we saved it, and we load this up, in Firefox we see 2 lines. If I take and loaded in Internet Explorer, and this is the test actually, let's see if I've got Internet Explorer on here. I do. We see 2 lines as well. Okay, good. Some browsers you only see 1 line. Depends on whether they're XHTML compatible yet. And these are some old browser versions. I haven't updated this computer in a long time. It's running an old XP system, so it's interesting to see that 2 lines do show up in both, which is good. It's good for me to know. So. All right. This is slide 8. Alright, so let me go back and move on to another topic. So in terms of, we stopped on slide number 8. If I can get back there. Hello. I know my yes?
50%. It means 50% of the page?
Yeah. If we take and, hold on one second. There we go. If we take and use a width is equal to 50%, it's going to go half. It's going to cut, it's actually going to, well, actually, we'll see what happens. Let's see. Here's our header. So let's take this off here. Oops. Actually, I want to do is purposely make an error as well sometimes so I can kind of see the effect. 50%, but it's centered. Because the horizontal rule actually applies the center tag. When we start learning about CSS, we can change that behavior. We can make it left or right justified instead of center in terms of the, because what we do with the CSS, to give you kind of an example, is we can take and apply a different style to the tag. So it has different characteristics. And the way we do that, and then we can just use the tag. So every time we use a horizontal rule, instead of it being 50% and centered, it can be 50% left justified or something. Which, so good question and good answer. I mean, good. If, let's say, for example, I make a mistake. This is, I kind of wanted to do this already, but let's do this. Let's say I just go like this, and I'm sloppy. This is one of the problems with writing this HTML code. There shouldn't be, oh, well, it goes down to 5. Okay, hold on one second, because this is sloppy. Hold on one second. Let's do this. It read, it shouldn't have produced anything. Let's call it read, there we go, equals, let's try that out. I'm purposely trying to make an error in here. And although the browser is correcting it for me, let's see what it does for this one. It put it in there anyway. Okay. All right, let's try something else. Let's put in, it's thinking too much for me. Let's try this. Let's go H R R. That's not a tag that I'm familiar with, so that shouldn't do anything. It should be extremely ignored. There we go. So what ends up happening is when you open up the page and you go, well, where's my horizontal rule? Because you've made an error either with one of the parameters. Either the browser is going to correct it for you, and Internet Explorer is not going to correct it, so people see different things. Or it's just going to leave it out. So in terms of what happens with the parsing process when you make an error, nothing shows up. If I made an error on the top and said HTML, I said, let's go here. If I go up here and say PP HTML, because I hit my keyboard while I was saving it, Please be blank. Nope. Okay, so this browser is going to correct it, which is not helping me at all demonstrate anything. Well, let's see what Internet Explorer does. It's probably going to correct it as well. Yeah, it did. All right. Let's make it even worse error here. Let's just take this out. Let's go like this. Yeah, you know what? It's probably going to correct it for me. Ah, it's going to correct it. All right, forget it. I can't do it wrong. Other times, it'll come up blank, and you'll wonder, why is the page blank? And you'll go, ah. Usually when you're using a scripting language, you'll end up with more of that going on. So let's see. All right, very good. Very good example as well. We didn't change the size of the line, but you could probably see how that's done in terms of hitting the size at 10. So let's talk about aligning text. We can include what's called a div tag, which is kind of the newer version. In the old days, we used to go center, left, right. There's actually a couple of older and more modern ways of doing this. So you can specify how the elements should be aligned. The default is left aligned in most browsers. But again, you're working on the default of the browser. You can actually change the browser preferences and set the alignment to the right or set it to center. Only problem is every one of your users who looks at your page is also going to have to change the preferences. So most people don't take that approach. Don't change the browser preferences. Change it on the website. Change it on the web page itself. So you can use a style tag. So you can utilize the style in terms of the attributes of the tag. So to justify more than one element as a group, you can also use div in terms of division, or if you want to keep it as a grouping tag. So all elements enclosed in the div are formatted in a similar way. So let's take a look at the code here. We've got a style. So we actually have a tag called style. And this is our kind of our pre-CSS kind of exposure, because what we're doing with CSS is we're setting styles. So we're here for H1, we're setting the style to text-align is equal to center. We could also use, actually, you know what? This is number 5. Let's go out here. I want to show you something else as well. So we're on to number 5. We could also, instead of taking that approach, just go back to, we'll just do this separately. Center. Putting in a center tag, which isn't changing the style. It's just a manual tag. So we're not using a font tag or using any other type of tag. We say it's going to center the text. So center, bold, as an example. Here we go. This is centered. And, oops, centered and bolded, bold. And then we can close the tags. Be in backwards order. Oops, center. There we go. And put a key in there. Or in this particular case, we're setting the H1 style, and we're saying centered. This is centered heading H1, and then this is a left justified text, which is the default for HTML. And then style. This is centered. We're changing it from left. What we're looking at is this right here. We're looking at, instead of setting the text alignment to center, now we're saying, here we go, text alignment is equal to right, justified. And we're using this new tag, and this is sometimes new for even people who've done HTML who've never used a div. It's giving you like a starting and an ending point. It's dividing out the section of your document into a particular area, so all of the changes affect everything. You don't have to keep doing it, because the reason why we're going to actually eventually get to CSS is because this is a lot of work. If you're saying you want something centered, you have to say centered. If you're saying you want something bolded, bold. If you set the style sheet, you could just create each one of the pages, and everything's centered, bold, and italics, and red automatically for you. And you just apply the style sheet to it, and you don't have to manually set every one of these paragraphs or every one of these things. But we have to manually set them to learn what they are. Then we set them globally for the document in the CSS sheet. So this is right now just for practical learning experiences. So in terms of the right align, everything in here until the closing div is going to be right aligned. Because we've got some text in here, we've got an H2 header in here. This is right aligned text. And we've got the closing body tag. So if I save this sucker and bring it up to my web browser, this is centered and bold, which is this is the part I added. Actually, it was just not in the example. Using a manual center tag, I say, okay, well, let's not do that. Let's take a look and say, oh, well, this is the header 1 that we set the style to alignment to centered. So that is actually centered. And here's the interesting thing, is it should be centered no matter how small I make the browser, which is another source of confusion for a lot of people. They go, I don't want to use the center. I want to use a 10 spaces in. I want it to line up correctly. And then someone goes and expands their browser and everything is left of center or something. So if you actually use the center, it will center in terms of the definition in relationship with the browser window. So as the browser readjusts, so will the text. And if you use that essentially for your text boxes, for your charts and things, they'll always look correct in terms of their placement on the page, especially if you line it correctly. So it's what kind of, we have many different options, but if you think about the technique and you actually kind of plan how things are going to appear, they always appear consistently versus the unexpected side result. And here's where we started that div tab. And the div tab said, let's write justify here. We want to start getting familiar with this div tab because we can set a bunch of stuff without using a CSS or anything. And we can essentially just start something and say, hey, everything's right aligned right now. And then at the end of that section, close the div tag. And you've divided out, div stands for divide. You've divided out that particular section of the page and you've applied a separate format for it and a separate characteristics. And it comes in handy, and you use it a lot actually, because if you divide the page out into different regions and sections, what we're going to see in a few minutes when I start looking at frames, then it's easier to manage everything. It's easier to organize in terms of no weird side effects. So let's see if we're back here. We're back. Very good. So that was the div, also with the style. So the style is applied to any one of the built-in. In fact, we could apply it to H2, H3, H6. We've only seen that so far, which is why it's in this particular example it's applied to the H1 in terms of the style. And do stop me if anyone has any questions at all as well. Text styles. Okay, so let's take a look at this in terms of the manually setting, and this is where things kind of get, well, what tag do I want to use? We've seen bold. We've seen, we haven't seen italics, but you could probably imagine the I for italics, the U for underline. And this is where people go, well, what do you mean? Typewriter text? What's that? TT? If you want to look like, it was written on a typewriter. And there's a bunch of miscellaneous other tags, such as big, small. When you don't care, you just want it to be smaller. And it'll be smaller and proportionate to the text that's surrounding it, hopefully, depending upon what text is around it. And these have built-in preferences. So in the browser, going back to the concept of the browser is defining what big and small are, which is kind of risky, which is why people don't use it. Big could be really big. So note the elements are nested in the order of the opening and closing, which is important. Must be last in, first out, as I mentioned last week when I was showing you the lecture stuff. So here's the text is emphasized with bold. So we have the bold, the B, the italicized, or big in terms of the big text, and we have a line break in here. And this line break with the backslash is very common for XHTML. It's in this lecture set. The ones I've been showing you before, I've had the backslash in front. We all know why, because this is an empty tag. When it's an empty tag, you put the backslash on the other side of the tag, which experienced people don't do, actually. You see sloppy HTML all the time. And it's an empty tag, but they'll put it in the front. In fact, I'll do that actually as well, just because I'm so used to putting it there. Underlining, generally recommended. The underlining is not generally recommended, actually, because then it looks like a hyperlink. The hyperlink style is underlined, and we'll see that in a few minutes. And if we're going to underline it, people are going to click on it. I go, well, that's really just a style thing. Small. This is the small text here. We've put some code that's going to be displayed that's going to be small. So, and we're also using the TT in here as well. So this one is number 6. And number 6, here's our small sum equals sum plus I, our small little code. And here's our underlying. Actually, you can color it and underline it. Looks like a link. Click here for your $1 million prize sweepstakes certificate. Nothing's happening. Mess people up. All right. So let's see. What else? What else do we got? More styles. Sub and super. So we have subscripts and superscripts. So we can essentially apply a span. Well, let me talk about super and subs first, then we'll move into the second concept. So here's our title. We have the same thing as before. Our body. Subscript is going to basically put it in below. Super is going to put it in above in terms of specifying out what information, what it's going to be, super or sub. And I'm going to assume you guys are familiar with those concepts. And then we also have our regular old style that we've applied to P. Last time we saw it with H1 or HR. No, horizontal rule. No, we saw it with H. We saw it with the header 1. Is what we saw it with. Now we're going to set the style for the paragraph to. And this is kind of interesting. The style is going to be color : red, and this is your start of CSS writing. This is where we're going to start setting styles, essentially. And we can do that in line. So you'll see more of that instead of paragraph. And then font equals red. Font color is equal to red. Font size is equal to 4. This, that, anything you could do about a font. So what we're looking at in terms of the level of abstraction is moving it up a little bit and saying, let's just set the color : red for the entire paragraph. And this is what we're going to be doing with our CSS. We can write the CSS stuff inside of the code, or we can write it out and put it into a separate file. Most likely, you're going to put style definitions in a separate file, because you write them once and you include the file in each one of your HTML pages. So let's go back to the quote here, to the span. In terms of the span, we're looking at dividing out for inline text. So for the inline text inside of the paragraph, we are applying the style of the color to be equal to red. And we have subscripts, and we're ending the spans. So when we take here color is equal to blue for the superscript, in terms of here we've got an example 2 sub 10, close the sub for the super sub. This is how we would use it. So we can embed directly into the text itself this style that we're going to apply to the text tag when the tag is being used, which is the concept of what CSS is all about. We'll see a lot more of these examples. This is kind of too early, I think, in order of the slide set, but I figure give you smaller steps and then we'll see it applied to a CSS sheet. So in order to avoid affecting line spacing, usually it should be made smaller, so we have small 2. Let's take a look. So we have 2 sub 10. Hello, there we go. Let's take a look to see this page, what this page looks like. This is number 7, I believe. Take a look here and make sure. Okay. Okay. So we have subscripts in red, superscripts in blue. We have applied the superscript. Where's our subscript? Oh, we didn't do a subscript. Oh, yeah, maybe that was the subscript that we did right there. It's hard to see it on the screen, actually, because it's kind of, well, we applied small to it as well, which didn't make it any better. And so we embed directly into text in order to avoid, here we go, line spacing. So we can make it smaller. So when we actually make things smaller, what ends up happening, you'll see this in a lot of like scientific documents and stuff. When you make it smaller, it stands out actually more. You think smaller would be the opposite, but because of the line spacing around it, your eye gets drawn towards the smallness of it, and you see the white space around it, and it makes it stand out on the page a little bit more, because you still get the same line spacing as if it were the regular font size, because it's mixed in and it's smaller. So if we take a look in that, view the page source, then we have our span here where we've got our color is equal to red, and then we close the spans. Well, what we've done is kind of embedded a style inside of the text itself, inside of the paragraph, if that makes any sense. We've opened and closed it, and then we've let the paragraph go in terms of the sub. Or here's our sub tag, and this is our opening and closing sub tag, and then we have a span again. We'll see span and a lot more examples coming up soon, but what we're doing is we're applying it. And then when it gets applied, and then when we're done, we close it, which is what our closing span is, and then we don't have to redefine the wheel for everything. We just open and close it. So it cuts down, essentially, on redefining information over and over again. So we'll see that applied to CSS next week, probably. We'll be getting there by next week. Okay, so here's a couple of other, not quite common, the pre. So specifying text that is to be displayed as is. Line breaks, spaces are preserved. So that kind of violates the rules a little bit in terms of, pre-processed. Don't process it. And just give it to me the way it is. Because I don't want to put in the line breaks, and I don't want to put in all those extra spaces and stuff. I just want you to see it the way I've got it specified. So here we have our body, and we've got in the teletype text, typewriter text, I'm saying pre, and then I've got this stuff, and it's going to be shown on the screen just like that. And then I'm saying close the pre tag, so make it so that and then close the teletypes. What we're looking at in terms of the significant is all of this pre-formatting is going to be preserved, which is what pre is like, pre-processing, pre-formatting. Very, very bad in terms of HTML, because what you could do is essentially just put pre at the top of your HTML page, format it all out. What you see is what you get. Put pre at the bottom. There's my web page. But the problem is you can't apply anything to it. You can't apply any special formatting to it because it's going to give you as is. So if you wanted a bold, underlined, or something of that nature, left or right justified, you'd have to set it up ahead of time, put the pre-processed text out there, and then continue. Not bad when you're taking information. Let's say you're building a web page that's pulling text from another document or from another source. You might want to see what's actually coming out, especially if you're trying to do some debugging on it or something. Give me the error message, as it came out with all of the spaces and everything, the way it was formatted, which makes sense. So we have our block quote as another tag, and specify the text that's going to be indented by both margins. The block is kind of like a dictionary. You've got a word and you've got a block. So it's left and right justified, but it's not at the margins. It's blocked. So useful for quotations, for indenting text in some subsections, or for special formatting. And here we're going to use. We haven't set any parameters for the block. We've essentially just set use the browser's default block quote definition. So if I bring that up in a web browser, come on, there we go. Page number 8. I see my what you see is what you get, but I applied a formatting to it. I gave it the TT, teletype text, but a nice spacing, nice job. My HTML spacing there, and here's my block. It's indented, so this is the block text. I could change the properties associated with the block, and I could get it maybe perhaps narrower if I wanted to by changing the width of the block. And there was a, hold on a second. Nope, I don't know where where it is. There was a preferences tag, actually. You could set that at the block size for certain browsers that were small. But I'll leave that alone. Okay, moving right along. So we got grouping. We got pre and pre-text. Let's talk about lists. Lists are pretty good. And what I'm showing you today is actually some basic HTML tags that you will use even with CSS. We have some other ones that are just, there's a million of HTML tags. In fact, you can go online and you can see pages and pages of reference to HTML tags, and it would be not very productive to actually go through each one of them. But these are the ones you're going to use. You're going to use ordered lists, unordered lists, block lists with your CSS. Because it's not one of those things where you're changing a font size or changing, style. You need to know the fonts and the styles in order to create the styles for the tags that we're going to be putting in the CSS. But in this particular case, these don't normally end up in any of the CSS. This is going to be in the body of your document. And for some strange reason, lists are one of those things that end up in tables, or end up being one of those things that you do a lot of. And you can stick links, hyperlinks in lists. You can stick references in lists, text in lists. Anything can be a list. In fact, you can set up, and you might have seen it already, those frequently asked questions, and it shows you a huge list at the beginning. And you click on the links, and it takes you down. What we've done is set an anchor point for the list item that took us down to another list, what the anchor was for the list, and we'll see that in the coming slides coming up. So we can use it for website navigation. We can use it for displaying information. So we only have 3 different types, not too bad. And we can mix and mingle and embed the lists. So the first one is going to be the ordered list, and the OL is actually pretty self-explanatory. In terms of ordered list, we have the unordered list, or U, and then we have the DL definition list, which creates a different type of list. So the ordered list is the one that's going to use numbers or letters or something in terms of identifying A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3, 4. We can set using the HTML preferences in terms of the properties, alphanumeric or numeric, or excuse me, alpha or numeric tags for that. So LI is always a list item. And this is where people kind of, like, oh, I know how to make a list. And like, how come nothing's showing up in the list? Because we've created the list, but we haven't put in any list items. Or they put the list items in without creating the ordered list or the unordered list. So you leave out one little small little tag and nothing shows up on the screen. But let's see what we've got here. We've got, in this particular example, list item, first thing, second thing, third thing. So again, we have empty. Excuse me, it's not empty. It is a list item. And the list item automatically puts a return at the end. So we have list item, and we'll see this in a few minutes. I'll go back out and take a look at this. Where we have a ordered list. By default, I believe it's going to be numbered, but we'll take a look and see what the browser gives us. We can change that. In terms of the definition list, we have, and this is not usually used for dictionary stuff, but it comes in handy actually for, again, like frequently asked questions and giving out definitions in terms of help screens and stuff that are written in HTML. So the DL, opening and closing, definition list, we have the item that's going to be the term, or the thing that we're going to define, which is the DT, and then we have the DD, which is the definition. So the definition list definition and the definition list item. And so here we've got kind of a similar kind of thing, and this is kind of like what we're going to do with tables in a few minutes as well. Where we've got a definition list opening and closing bracket, as you see. And then here we have a term, definition term HTML, and then we have the definition of the definition term, the DD. It's a HyperText markup language. And then we have the definition term HTML, and then we have next to it the HyperText transfer protocol. So if we take a look at this guy, this is number 9, the output of it, yeah, it is numbers 1, 2, 3. As we didn't specify, but the default browser was 1, 2, 3. And in this particular case, just reiterating the point, we've relied on the default browser default setting, which may not be the same on everybody's browser. And this is another thing to think about in terms of when you start writing HTML code. What if I brought this up on an iPhone? Is the preferences, And that browser on my Safari or whatever it is on my iPhone going to be the same as in Firefox? Probably not. This is the most frustrating thing. So then you have to think, well, we can't use the defaults. We have to specify everything. And that's where the CSS actually comes in handy, because you can specify everything. And everything is going to be set in a certain way for you. All of your ordered list items are going to be numbers, or they're going to be bullets or something. It would be the unordered. So here we have our term, and we have our definitions. So, oops, hello. Going back, going back. All right. So let's take a look at references. We are slowly expanding our knowledge base. So perhaps the most important one you could possibly use, you're going to need to use these with or without a CSS, is you're going to have to put in what's called an anchor. Anchors are interesting. Anchors can go to the same page. Anchors can go to different pages. Anchors can have all sorts of different behaviors associated with it. The one that's most popular is the hyperreference, or hrefs, for hyperreference, which is going to be equal to some URL. This is what's going to create that link. Actually, I'm going to need to change that. So this is what's going to be able to create that link. When you click on it, it's going to be in a special default color that the browser has specified. And it's going to be underlined, and it's going to look like a clickable link. So where the URL is a web address of the page to be displayed when the user clicks on the link, you use the hrefs, and you put it in quotes because you're doing XHTML. Normally you don't even see it in quotes. For some strange reason, people don't like to put that in quotes. I don't know why. They always like to start it out with HTTP. So if the page is accessing something on the internet, you actually have to use the HTTP. You could use the www, and that does work with some browsers, but not all browsers. HTTP is telling you it's on the internet. It doesn't have to be. It could be on your website, and you could just put the name of a HTML file, like page1.html. We're going to see that a couple of examples coming up. And it's going to look for it in the local file structure, local directory. So we have target equals blank, so it causes the page to be loaded into a new window. So we can load it in the same window, or we can load it in a new window, depending upon what we want. And we'll see both of them actually. So let's go back to the example. We're on number 10, and number 10, it's going to put a link in. I don't know if that link's going to work. Let's see if I have internet access. Loading, loading. Hey, look at that. Okay, we're at IT, we're not at East Bay. We can tell when the last time I used this lecture was. Okay, no. Actually, it's going to an internal, so we'll go back here. So let's click back to this one. This one, we have a new page. This is actually loaded on my desktop. It's the last example that we just looked at. If I take a look at this page, this one here, and I look at the source, we can see that the hrefs doesn't have an HTTP anything on it. It's just got page09.html, and the target's going to be blank, which means give me a blank tab or a new web page, a new browser window. And because this is a Firefox, it's actually opening up a tab for me. And the title of page is up here. If this were Windows Explorer, it would open up a brand new window for me. The same, accomplishing the same task. And if I go in here and view the source, I'm looking at my last page, which was the 09 that's loaded up. So it's a totally separate way of opening up something new. People did this a lot in terms of opening up windows, setting the size of the window. This just opened up a blank window. You can create extremely irritating pop-ups this way without using a pop-up window, which violates all of the spam checks. So you can create your own custom pop-ups if you want by just opening up a window, opening up a tab. You know, you can create like 20 tabs if you really want to irritate your users. But the point's not to irritate your users, hopefully. So, oh, hello. Trying to get it back. Let's see. Let's go back. Ah, there we go. That's another way of going back. Alright, so we looked at the blank opening up in a new window, or the regular one. In terms of the hyperlinks, we're looking for long documents. So for a long document, you can even have hyperlinks to other locations in the document. So remember before creating that list item at the top, and we had list number 1, list number 2. We could create a bunch of URLs up there using a hyperlink. And we can actually go to different points in the document by creating what's called anchors, which is what this tag we're using. It's called an anchor tag. So we have A, which is actually short for anchor. A name is equal to indent, where your indent is a variable for identifying some location that's in the document. So let's see what we've got up here. We've got a list, and A reference to HTML, HTTP, IP, and TCP as an example. Down here we have A name is equal to HTML, HTTP. This is actually very commonly done. You'll see this in almost every website where it has frequently asked questions, or every website that has some sort of list at the top, and it's all on one page. Because why would you want to put this on 20 different pages? You're going to put this all on one page, and you're going to have a list at the top. The user's going to click on the list. It's going to take them down to the bottom. It's going to take you to that anchor, and you're going to read the text down there. And then you're going to go back, hit the back button, and it takes you back up to the top again. So it's kind of an automatic way of keeping it all condensed, keeping it all organized, and then creating it's kind of a go-to or a jump within the same document. So you can imagine how the navigation of the website could be greatly improved with that. So here we have our H reference up here. We're using this. So remember before I said HTTP if it's somewhere else on the internet, no address if it's local in the same directory, or the hash, the number sign. The number sign is telling us that we have some sort of tag, some sort of an anchor within the document. So this symbol here, this number sign symbol, tells us don't leave, be right here in the document and look for this anchor. And the anchor is going to be defined down here in terms of our list that we've got down here. And we've got we've created a list here, so we put in a definition list in here as well, where we've got the terms and the definitions going on. And then we're using the H reference. We could also H reference a URL with an index. So we can take it to a particular spot of the current page that we're on, or we could go to another page and take us to a particular spot. That really makes your web users happy. Have you ever clicked on something that said, download the registration form? And it takes you to the IT website, to the registration form section of the IT website, right there right there. That's helpful. Rather than saying, go to the IT website and find that registration form. Where is it? So used a lot, actually, most commonly used. Have that and tables as well. So let's take a look, see how the oh, no, that's not what I wanted. See how the functionality works. Oh, there we go. Number 11. So here's our links on the top. So, well, it's all on the same page. It's not helping us. All right, defeats the purpose. But here, wait a minute. Let me modify the page here. Well, oh, actually, I'd have to add a bunch of stuff in there. Let's do this. It's kind of sloppy code. Let's put this. We'll put the link in like 20 times. Putting content on the page. All right, let's see if that makes the page longer. I'm trying to make the page longer so you can actually see it move. Probably didn't make it that much longer. Nah. So if I go, well, IP's on the bottom, it's on the screen. There we go. Now his IP's up here. TCP. Well, here, let me go back up to the top. TCP is not visible, actually, here. There we go. HTML is not visible. Now it is. So you have to imagine a really long web page. So it's going to take you to the anchor. All right, so those are our anchors for HTML, H references, excuse me. Let's talk about images for a minute. Images are interesting because they can come from the internet, or they can come, actually my image is not going to be on my desktop. The image is going to be blank. So we're going to see what happens when the image is missing. So you can include an image using the image tag, img. It does not have to be in caps, although I did put it in caps here. So by default, the browser will display a GIF or a JPEG file. It does not display any other type. So you learn what type of images you can actually use. Most people would go with a JPEG because it's smaller in size, but you can use GIFs. Other image formats may require plugins for additional support, like Flash images and things of that nature. So image, and we'll talk about plugins later. So we have the image. The source is going to be a file name. And if the image is missing, you could put an alternative text. Say, alternatively, if the image is missing, most people see this red X through it. That means that's the default web browser because they didn't specify any alternative. Like, company logo goes here, and the company logo is missing. So you see an X. So that's the web browser telling you that the image is missing. So again, if you access over the internet, you must start with an HTTP for the URL for the image. So here we have the image. We can set a border around the image. The source, just the name of the file, which is not on an HTML, is not on HTTP location. It's actually on my local disk, which is not it's actually not on my local disk. The width, the height, the width, and then I could put a caption underneath it, which I've done. It's just my picture with my name underneath it, but as we see, the picture's going to be gone. I haven't set any alternative text though, so we'll see what the web browser gives us. Oh, there we go. I have to figure out what that motion is, so I can duplicate it. Here it is, the lovely picture, the broken picture. So we don't have a view image. Well, there's no view. Can't find it. I know it's missing. So Firefox no longer puts the X on it. I see. They have an empty window. So I can set the alternative text, and it'll put something there instead of that empty window, essentially, or it would show the image, essentially. And a lot of people make the mistake of actually putting the image on there and leaving the image without specifying the height and the width. And then you get the native format for how big the image actually is. So setting the height and the width are important in terms of scaling down the image so it fits in the proper location and the text wraps around it correctly. Otherwise, if the image is huge, it's going to be put up there in the same size that it's supposed to be in without any reduction. So. Last but not least for today, well, actually, we've got a little bit more time. Tables. Tables are an important concept. We have the table start and the table end. Kind of like the only thing we've seen similar to this was the definition list. But tables we use a lot of. So common tool for arranging text layout. So you can, tables divide out context into rows and columns, as we've seen, probably have seen before. By default, column entries are left justified. So you can provide for alignment. So here we have a table with a TR. The TR is table row. TR, so HTML is actually pretty English-like in terms of abbreviations. And then we have TD for table data. So we specify the row. In this row, we want this piece of data. This row, we want this piece of data. This row. And we just stack the data up, and they end up in different columns in the row. So what do we have here? We have a table up here, closing tag but table. Tables are, I would say, very common and are often a source of mystery for a lot of people because they start playing around. Oh, table row, table row, table row. They have all these rows and they're all empty. Oh, table data. It's mixing and matching the rows in the table with the data, which is the, I wouldn't call it tricky, but it's definitely a bit higher level than setting a font or a style. So table data, here we have foo, end of the table data. We have another piece of table data called bar, foo bar. And then we have the end of the row. So foo bar shows up on one row. And then we have a new row. And we have bizbaz and boo boo that are showing up in the table. This is number 13. Lucky number 13. We have no border on this table, by the way. I didn't show you the border, but I did show you how it's left aligned. And we have spaces in here, which gives us our table. So we have foobar and bizboo, bizbar, boo-boo, whatever, showing them on 1, 2, 3, 4 different quadrants. But we're not showing the table. So most people would actually use a table to set a left-hand margin for a menu, perhaps, or a top menu bar, perhaps, or section off pieces of, and one of your assignments will have you use a table. So the table is the outermost element, and inside of the table you're loading images, you're loading text, you're loading HTML pages, references, hyperreferences. You're loading all that stuff inside the table. So it starts building a document hierarchy, essentially, that you start working with. In baby steps, of course. All right, so let's go back here and see what we can do with a table. The layout in the table. So let's put a border on there. So now we have preferences that go along with the table. So we have the table opening and closing record, and then we have the preferences borders are going to be equal to 1. We have actually a lot of different preferences for that we can set. We can set you know, how it looks like it's outlined, it's deep, it's inserted. You know, have a raised border, the inserted border, a kind of fancy looking text, you know. So we have table row. We've set the alignment is equal to center. So this is where now we're going to set the alignment. And this is pretty standard. We've actually seen this style used. We're not defining a style. Instead, we're just going, let's take this property alignment. And most of the tags have the same properties, which is really easy to remember. That whenever you want to set alignment, it's going to be called align. And then here we have vertical alignment top, which means I can center it, you know, or is it going to vertically align it on the top, the bottom, left, the right. So if you go into Microsoft Word and take a look at tables, you have the same options. And you're setting, you know, how is it going to be centered, how is it going to appear. And so you can set the border using the border tab, property, excuse me, or attribute. And you can control the horizontal and the vertical layouts of the cells by using center right, vertical alignment from the top, from the bottom, because you want to have the table, you know, with the items in their appropriate spaces. So you can apply the outline to the entire row itself, or you can apply it inside of a row. So you can nest tag items inside the row data, or you could apply it to the entire row, which is interesting. Hardly anyone will apply it unless you've got the whole, like a huge table that spans your entire website, and you're applying inside of each one of the cells. You're essentially applying your own format. Do you guys want to see that applied, or should I go on? At this point, people get overloaded at this point. So, we'll skip it. All right. So we'll look at both of them at the same time, the next two. All right, so the width. So by default, the size is to fit the data. So the size actually gets adjusted for the largest piece of data that you're putting in there. But sometimes people don't want that, because what if you have a huge piece of data? It's going to look funny. So if you shrink the size of the column, it word wraps. So the data still fits in there, but it will span multiple lines instead. And you'll get this correct height and width, hopefully. So you can override the specific width by table referencing with the table width is equal to 60%, 50%, however you want it. So it's useful for page footers, let's say, to set the width to 100%. So the footer goes across the entire page of the web browser. First column is left justified, second column is right justified. To kind of set an even flow, essentially. Let's see, 14 and 15. Hello, there we go. Let's see. So 14, we've got our border, and we haven't set any width or foo-foo. How did we get foo-foo on there? I probably edited the file and forgot to save it and forgot to take it back. But actually, I can see how I got foo-foo on there. Oh, TD. Yeah. Last time I gave this lecture, I edited the file. It's not the same as the slide set. Yeah, table data. We have a break. I put a break in there, so we have foo, break, foo, which means inside of this piece of data, we have a line break. So we've got it in a list instead of back and forth. So, which is different than the slide set, but the way you actually learn this is to download or cut and paste them and then start playing around with them. Put an image inside of one of the tables and text inside of the other quadrants or something. Left, right, it spans 100%. So we can specify out here the width is 100%, and now we have it left and right justified. So we can actually have like flowing page essentially. You see this? Let's say if you want to have a running header or a footer, You want to put a page number. You want to put the author of the site or something on the bottom. You can adjust it using a table. Okay, so other table options. This is the padding I was talking about. So we could do table cell padding, which means give us 5 spaces after the text ends, before the table cell ends. So inside the data, we actually have it one space before and after. We pad it to add more spaces. So we have a bigger cell than the data actually fits into. And we can also add headings to the table. So the table header is similar to the table data, but it displays the header centered in bold automatically for us, unless we change it with a CSS. And so we can have the data that spans more than one column that appears in the header. This is more professional looking than some people who put the header, just center a piece of text above the table, put it in the table, keeps it all self-contained, keeps it like a little bit neater looking as well. And this is number 16. Believe it or not, we only have 20 of them, so we're getting close to the end. For those people with low attention spans. I always start losing people at this point. Alright, so number 16. We're getting there. Let's see. Header, header, header. Look at that. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. Ooh, interesting. 5, 6, 7. This is why I say you could take this, make it into your web page. It's the base, and you make it big, and you'll load everything inside of it, and everything is formatted correctly. Page gets small, page gets big, it all looks the same, which is why tables actually are very common. Let's see how this is done actually. What are we looking at? We are using the table header, where we've got 3 headers we put in here. We have header 1, header 2, and header 3. And this is going to basically stack them up as we've seen here. Header 1, header 2, and header 3. And then underneath it, we've got a table row, which is our 1, 2, 3 row. And table data, 1, 2, 3. So hopefully you're getting the impression that each one of the rows is individually configured. So row number 1 has got 3 spaces. Row number 2, and there's only 2 rows in this. No, there's 3 rows. There's 3 rows in this. If we count down the maximum number of row entries, data pieces in a column, we end up with 3. And we have 1, 2, 3, looks like. So the row span 2 for column number 3, row span is going to give us our columns for number 2, row number 2. We have it spanning 2 rows. So it's centered, and we've got the number 4. This is the line I'm looking at right here. That's giving us this 4 right here. It's because we're spanning 2, 1, 2. So we'll do spanning, and actually we could just expand that way just if we wanted to as well, and combine 2 rows together, to combine 2 columns into a row, just by including number 5, which is that example. And number 5 says column span instead of row span 2. So number 5, we've got 2 columns that are being spanned. For some strange reason, students don't like to do this. They think it's complicated. I don't think it's complicated at all. In fact, one of your assignments is going to have you create a table and put a website inside of it. And obviously your table isn't going to have rows and columns that are equal size and width. They're going to be different. Because they're going to need to accommodate the content that you're putting in there. So, alright. And as I mentioned before, if you want to create a table, you just download the slide set. And this is slide set number 4. And you can actually create the, cut and paste the code, put it in there. Let's talk about something nobody ever wants to talk about because this is going away. Frames. Frame sets. Not compatible with all browsers, not compatible with mobile devices. Very, very old, but it's still being used. And some web browsers don't actually support frames anymore. What is a frame? You're taking the web browser window and you're dissecting it. Different than a table. Most people would use tables now. So frames provide the ability to split the screen into independent pages. And you must redefine a frame set that specifies the layout of the page. People used to do this a ton of times for menus. As an example, you bring up a website. And you always want something on the screen. You never want it to go away. And let's say it's the menu and you have it on the top or you have it on the side. It never goes away. When you click on an item, it opens it up in a different frame. It opens it up on the right or opens it up on the left or the top or down or something. So this is consistent. So people used to make frames. Put a logo up in the corner, menu bar across the top or menu bar on the side. And that's always there. So you don't have to create different pages. You create pages that get loaded into one of the quadrants. And we'll see that happening. Actually, I'm going to take this last couple of examples, takes and creates frames and loads all my other examples into it. So you can kind of see how it might be used. So in particular, page number 17 is going to have two pages. So we're going to have a source page 1 and a source page 2. So inside the frames we're loading the HTML documents. We could have very easily put in websites. We could have put in HTTP references and loaded in websites or something. We could divide it vertically or we could divide it horizontally, or we could do both. And here's the problem. You create too many frames, you really irritate your users. Because it's hard to print frames, as another example. They're unprintable. You can't just go to the document and print it. It's going to, one frame at a time is going to print. And browser support extremely limited for frames and going away. But you still see it. Sometimes you might end up having to edit some HTML code. Nice to know what a frame is, but you're never going to use it. Columns here, let's say 50-50. You're going to divide out the page into two columns, 50-50 each, or maybe rows, 30% row, causing a browser to divide the remaining space among the pages themselves. And looking at in terms of the default, I'm going to go through the rest of this and I'm going to show you the frames. So then you're going to see them all together, which makes more sense. The frame defaults themselves. By default, each frame is an independent page. And it's scrollable. So you have a left and right scroll bar. You could turn off the scroll bars, which makes it more professional looking. You can leave them on, and then you end up with the old style Java help tutorials that Sun put out, which is really bad. Heavily used frames. Only problem is the frame is so small and the text is so big, and you're like scrolling to see the text inside of the frame. It was really bad. So they changed to more of a anchor, hyperlink anchor kind of outline format, which is much better. You can even nest frames. You can put a frame inside of a frame inside of a frame. And then you get really complicated frames going on with that. You can set the frame border. You can set it to 0 to turn off the border, which is what I would do. You can set it to 1 if you actually want to see the borders around the frames. Frames are probably the most controversial HTML feature on the market. So some people love them, some people hate them. I hate them. And I'm not subtle about that either. I really do hate them. So 2 reasons to use the frame. So here's why people use them. All right, so as a navigation aid, it's an inexpensive, inexperienced way of creating navigation for your website, which is how it originally started. So you can divide out everything, and you have static frames, and you have a main frame. So you can have navigational frames, and you have a main frame that shows the contents. If it's used that way, it makes sense. However, you make the browser smaller, and the frames get all messed up, so the window's smaller. You can also use it as a means of separating out the program input from output. If you go on to some of the HTML editing sites that I'll probably show you next week, you can type in HTML code and you press show it to me, and it opens it up in another frame and you can see the code. And in terms of, it actually just presents it, interprets it and presents it as executed HTML code like the browser would present. So you can divide the screen out into static input from frames, and then have a button that displays the output essentially. And here's our example that I'm going to show you. You can specify out, and let me just point out before I bring up the example so you can kind of see what I'm looking at. And this is number 19 and 20, if I remember this correctly. So you can create a menu, which is what we're going to do essentially. The menu is going to be in one side of the frame, and then the pages are going to load in the other side of the frame. So the name of the frames are in the frame set. So you identify the name of the frame, you set it as a target, and then for the target you load something. As an example here, we have target main, main. We have in here, we have demo. We have a hyperreference to page number 2, page number 3, page number 4. These are all the previous examples that I've looked at. And then down here on the bottom I've got another hyperlink let's say I put, just a regular old hyperlink to the IT website on there, and the target is the top. Go to the top of the page, and then over here on the frame set, I have in there load page 19, in there load page 1, which is going to be my first example. So let me show you this actually. This is why I put everything over here. Okay, so number 17. What example am I on? Number 17 is our first one I showed you. This is what the frame looks like. And if we look at the source, what we've got, this is essentially the page with 2 frames on it. And in here I've got page 01 and page 02, which are our first 2 examples that we looked at today. Hello world, and this is a whole lot of text that goes on and on and on forever without any word wrapping. These are controlled separately. The web browser, this browser, it thinks I have 2 web windows open. What happens over here stays over here. What happens over here stays over here. However, it's controlled by the same document, which is what we're going to see in the next example. I think it's 8. No, I think it's 20. This is our horizontal. So instead of cutting it down the center vertically, we've just cut it down horizontally, and I've loaded 2 other examples in there. Actually, I've done both. It's a vertical and a horizontal frame set in here. I don't believe this one was in the slide set, actually. This is where I've got one for the row, and then I've got the source here on the bottom. So the extra stuff on the bottom is just what was left in the default space. So I've got frame set, and then I've got 2 frame sets going on. I can actually nest them even further. 19 and 20 are the ones that are particularly interesting. So 19 is the menu. And the menu just has demo 1, demo 2, and demo. This is going to essentially bring up, but here it's going to take me to a new page. This is a demonstration why people use frames. But maybe I don't want a new page opened up, because I have a pop-up blocker on here, and it's not going to allow me to open up a window or something. Then I can do this attempt, where I've got now, in example number 20, I've loaded by default Hello World, which is page number 001, or 01, demo 1. If I click on demo 2, lo and behold, on the right-hand side, something else changes. Demo 3, demo 4. Well, let's try the IT website. The IT website should load up in that frame. Oh, the whole thing loaded up. Well, I probably didn't set the... I'll have to take a look at the code. What did I do? Let's see. Oh, wrong one. Wrong page. That's the problem. I'm looking at the page source for this one. Well, we'll go this way. Hold on. This is the one I wanted. Well, interesting. It should have loaded it up in the second frame. However, you can actually put a no frames and disable frames on the top of the website. Which is interesting, actually. It should have opened it up in the right-hand frame. It didn't. It opened it up. But you can turn frames off. So your website, your browser won't give you frames. You can disable it completely. I'm not quite sure they actually would put that on there, but perhaps they did. Alright, so what I've got now are just some concluding rules of thought here. Next week, what we're going to do is take a look at CSS. Start creating CSS tags. This is pretty much all of the HTML basic, as low level as I can get it. Here's a tag, here's how you use it. So next week we'll do the same thing for CSS. The following week, then we start putting the pieces together and we move it up a notch. We start making it a little bit more sophisticated. We start looking at designs and styles and image maps, which are interesting, and using sound and graphics and things, and using plugins, browser plugins and stuff for all sorts of different multimedia and stuff like that. So some rules of thumb. HTML provides you a lot of neat little features. What I usually see from new people who write HTML pages is like a, what do they call that? You stick everything in a blender and it explodes up all over the page. You go to a website, you got sound in the back. It's kind of like MySpace pages used to be when people learned HTML. They have audio, visual, 25 different colors, animated GIFs, all this stuff going on, and it's information overload. So there's basic design styles that you're supposed to follow and best practices. Don't add features that distract from the content of the page. Use color and fonts sparingly. Most people follow the same standard that they do with PowerPoint presentations. You're only supposed to use like 1 or 2 fonts or something, and only have so many bullet items, and only have so many items on a menu, and make sure the font's of a certain size or above type rule. You can find all sorts of style guides online. You can also find books that people have written, because with HTML they give you all the tools, they give you all the tags, but nobody ever gives you how to use them. And it's kind of like painting. It can teach you how to all the different colors and all the different color combinations, and they can hand you a whole thing of paints and a paintbrush, but you're not going to be an artist unless you study the techniques of how you're supposed to put all the pieces together and create the pages. So I'm not going to read through all these for you, but you can download it and read through it yourself. Not using images only where appropriate. And if you think about some of the concepts here, the more you add to the page, the longer it takes to load, and the more irritating it is to the user. They used to have this thing called a 3-second rule, and if the page doesn't load within 3 seconds, the user's gone. You're going to click the back button, or you're going to leave, which is why a lot of people don't like to put images on the websites. Sound is also irritating. You're in an office environment, you bring up a website, and this disco song comes on in the background. Also annoying the user. You can actually, with color combinations, with text that's hard to read, using a dark font on top of a dark background or something of that nature would annoy somebody reading something, making something hard to find, not having a menuing system, not using a proper site map or something for the website. So stick to the standard features and using essentially for the browser themselves, and you'll end up hopefully creating some beautiful websites. And if you really want to learn how to do that, you take a design course. The basic HTML course isn't going to teach you how to design. It's just going to make you dangerous so you can make irritating websites. So, questions, comments, concerns? I'm also open for requests and suggestions for things that you want to see more examples of in the future as well. You can always send me an email message or catch me after class. Otherwise, we're done for today. So, next week's CSS Part 1. Okay, see you next week.